You step into a room heavy with the stench of rot and sweat. The curtains are drawn, trapping the air thick and sour, and in the center lies the body of a king. His flesh is swollen, his chest heaves with effort, and the bed creaks beneath his weight. George IV, once the regent of Britain, now so obese that he cannot rise without aid, sits slumped among pillows. His swollen legs ooze with fluid, mottled with purple blotches, while the smell of decay clings even before death has taken him. Physicians whisper of gout, of heart failure, of a liver drowned in wine. You are close enough to hear the labored wheeze, close enough to see his trembling hand fail to lift a glass. The most powerful man in Britain could no longer stand on his own. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you're about to remember may never leave you again. If the story you are about to hear unsettles you, let it. History was not meant to be gentle. Kings rotted, just as their subjects did. If this glimpse into what power could not protect is of value to you, then subscribe, share, and remain with us. Only if you truly wish to see the past without disguise. Only if you are prepared to sit in silence with the truth. As it was, you are in England, in the early decades of the 19th century. The empire is expanding, its fleets crossing oceans, its armies pressing deep into foreign lands. Yet inside the grand palaces of London, another empire is collapsing. An empire of flesh, of indulgence, of one man's failing body. His name is George Augustus Frederick. To the public he is Prince Regent, later George IV. To his physicians, he is a man sinking beneath the weight of his own excess. You find yourself within the gilded halls of Carlton House, the Regent's London residence. It is a place lined with velvet curtains, crystal chandeliers, and marble floors polished until they gleam. But beneath the surface glamour, servants whisper of a ruler consumed by appetite. He drank heavily, his meals were feasts, and he clothed himself in silks that strained at the seams. His portraits show a broad figure in military dress. But the paint cannot fully conceal the truth. His body was spiraling into ruin. The era you inhabit is one of political tension. George has acted as regent since 1811, when his father, George III, slipped into permanent madness. While the kingdom debates reform, while wars rage on the continent, the regent drowns his worries in wine and food. Dinners stretch long into the night, with courses stacked upon courses, roasted meats, sugared confections, and oceans of brandy. By the time he ascends to the throne in 1820, the physical cost is already written into his swollen frame. You are not alone in these rooms. Physicians pace the corridors, summoned at all hours to ease his pain. They note his gout, a disease of swollen joints brought on by rich diet. They record his breathlessness, his heart that labors under the load. Contemporary accounts tell us he wore corsets to bind his belly, desperate to appear slimmer in public. But behind closed doors, the truth is plain. Each step is an effort, each rise from a chair a struggle. You, as witness, see how the king avoids public appearances. At coronations and ceremonies, heavy robes are required, but George can scarcely endure their weight. Observers remark that he no longer rides, no longer stands without assistance. When forced to appear, he leans on attendants or collapses into ornate chairs. The body of the monarch, once symbol of national strength, has become a theater of decline. This is not merely indulgence. It is illness compounded by wealth. Accounts from his physicians describe dropsy, fluid swelling in the legs and abdomen. His liver, overburdened, enlarged. His bladder, tormented by stones, required painful procedures. His skin often bore eruptions and sores. You stand near enough to smell the sweet, sickly odor of disease seeping from him. An odor familiar to doctors of the time, who recognized it as a sign of failing organs. Outside the palace walls, pamphleteers and cartoonists seize upon his girth, mocking him as the Prince of Wales. But within these walls, it is less comic than tragic. You are placed in the chamber of a king who cannot rise unaided. Who fears the simple act of walking across a room? Power does not prevent flesh from collapsing. Authority does not prevent the body from drowning in itself. The story you will follow moves toward a death both grotesque and inevitable. In 1830, George IV's reign ends not with a glorious final scene, but with a body broken by its own weight. You will be there, in the bedroom at Windsor Castle, with the curtains drawn, as physicians gather, as attendants wipe his brow, as his lungs fill and his heart stutters. This is why you are here, not to watch the victories of empire, but to confront the decay of the man who wore its crown. You are in the year 1762, in the gilded rooms of St. James's Palace, where George Augustus Frederick is born, the first son of George III and Queen Charlotte. You stand among courtiers who murmur their congratulations, unaware that this infant, swaddled in silks, will one day be remembered less for his victories and more for the collapse of his body. At birth, nothing suggests the ruin that lies ahead. The child is strong, well-fed, heir to a stable dynasty. His father is young, his mother dutiful, and Britain is rich from empire. But already, the path of indulgence is being laid. You move forward through years. The young George is indulged, raised with tutors, surrounded by luxury. His education is broad, languages, politics, etiquette, but discipline is weak. By adolescence, he is tall, handsome, and charismatic. Court diaries describe his charm, his gift for conversation, his flair for style. He becomes a patron of the arts, a lover of music and architecture. But he also becomes known for gluttony, for endless banquets, for wine flowing in rivers. By his 20s, observers note a softening of his figure, the beginnings of weight he will never shed. As regent, beginning in 1811, his appetites grow unchecked. Britain is at war with Napoleon. But in Carlton House, George holds feasts of near medieval scale. Eyewitnesses record dinners of more than 100 dishes. French chefs serve towering confections, gilded with sugar and cream. He drinks heavily, port and brandy poured into goblets like water. Courtiers whisper of him eating 5, 6, 7 courses in a sitting, then collapsing into chairs, gasping for breath. The human body was not built for such strain. But no one dares deny him. You stand beside his physicians as they write their notes. They observe symptoms that medicine of the time can scarcely treat, gout twisting his joints, leaving him unable to walk without agony, dropsy, or edema, filling his legs until they swell like bloated sacs of fluid, angina tightening his chest, leaving him pale and gasping. His corsets, laced tight, attempt to hold the flesh in place. But beneath them, his abdomen hangs heavy. In portraits, painters still try to flatter him, shaping his form into something grand. But here, in the dim rooms, you see the truth, his body a prison of pain. Reports from attendants tell of nights when the king cannot sleep. His breathing rattles, his lungs straining. Servants shift him, piling pillows to keep him upright. The sheets beneath him are damp from sweat. The air is sour, a mix of wine, sickness, and failing flesh. Sometimes he refuses to leave his bed for days. On other days, he insists on dressing in silks, his attendants straining to wrap the garments around his massive frame. The effort leaves him trembling, but he clings to dignity. Contemporary records describe his weight. Estimates suggest more than 20 stone, over 280 pounds, though some claimed much higher by the end. His physicians warn him. They pled for moderation, for exercise, for restraint, but the king dismisses them. Food and drink are his refuge, and indulgence his constant companion. As you watch, you see how each indulgence adds another stone to his body, another layer of suffering to his final years. Public opinion turns harsh. Caricaturists like James Gilray sketch him as grotesque, swollen, a Prince of Wales. In these satirical prints, you see his bulk exaggerated, his flesh spilling from royal robes. The public laughs, but inside the palace, laughter turns to silence. The truth is worse than caricature. His joints inflame so badly that attendants carry him from room to room. He can no longer ride a horse, no longer walk through gardens. At Windsor, he remains cloistered, shuffling a few steps before collapsing. You are in 1820, when he ascends the throne as George IV. The coronation is meant to display majesty, but behind the velvet curtains, the king is barely able to stand. He sweats under the weight of the crown. His robes, heavy with embroidery, nearly crush him. Witnesses record how attendants supported him throughout the ceremony, whispering encouragement. Outwardly, the kingdom sees splendor. Inwardly, you see collapse. In later years, his ailments multiply. Gout worsens. His bladder develops painful stones, forcing crude medical interventions without anesthesia. His legs ulcerate, sores weeping through bandages. Dropsy distorts his figure further, swelling his abdomen until it seems ready to burst. Observers describe his eyes sinking, his cheeks mottled, his skin flushed with the hues of liver failure. His breath is shallow, wheezing. The once vigorous prince who charmed Europe is gone, replaced by a man crushed beneath his own body. You witness his final decline at Windsor Castle in 1830. By now, George can no longer rise from his chair without help. Even supported, his legs tremble, unable to carry his weight. His attendants lift him from bed to commode, each movement punctuated by groans. His flesh is tender, ulcerated, and raw. The stench of disease clings to him. Doctors note heart failure, diseased arteries, an enlarged bladder, and cirrhosis of the liver. The king's body is failing from every angle. On June 26, his final day arrives. Physicians gather, servants stand by. You are among them, silent, as the king gasps for air. Drops of sweat bead his brow. His chest heaves, his face pale. He whispers for relief, but no relief comes. In his last hours, he drifts in and out of consciousness, clutching at sheets, moaning softly. Then, as the sun sets, his breathing slows. His swollen chest rises one final time, then collapses. Silence falls. The obese king who could not stand alone has died, aged 67. The aftermath is no cleaner. As his body is prepared, attendants struggle with the sheer weight of him. The corpse is bloated, discolored, and difficult to move. The stench intensifies, spreading through the chamber. Physicians record the autopsy. The heart enlarged, the bladder enormous with stones, the stomach swollen. His liver shows signs of chronic disease. Each organ tells the same story, decades of indulgence carved into flesh. And you, as witness, are left with the truth. A monarch surrounded by gold and power, undone by appetite, a body that ruled a kingdom but could not rule itself. You remain in Windsor Castle, the year 1830, but the story pulls you backward, retracing the years that led to this chamber of rot. To understand how George IV reached this final state, you must move through his reign, through the politics he neglected, the pleasures he embraced, and the visible toll that excess carved into his body. You see him first not as a dying monarch but as a regent at the height of his influence. The year is 1811, and the madness of George III has forced Parliament to appoint his eldest son as ruler in all but name. The Prince Regent steps forward, draped in jewels, his hair powdered, his coat embroidered. Crowds cheer, for his reputation promises glamour. He sponsors painters, architects, musicians. His favorite creation rises in Brighton, the Royal Pavilion, a palace of domes and minarets, a fantasy of Eastern splendor. To outsiders, it is the mark of a refined king. To those within the court, it is the monument of a man devoted to pleasure above duty. You are present at the pavilion. The halls are vast, decorated with dragons and gilt, filled with music and laughter. But even here, the shadows of appetite creep. Feasts stretch late into the night. George sits at the head of the table, his girth straining against his waistcoat. Glass after glass of brandy is raised. Servants carry platters piled high, roasted pheasant, venison, puddings dense with sugar. Guests record astonishment at the sheer scale of his indulgence. The prince eats until his face reddens, until his breath comes heavy. Then he leans back, demanding more drink. You notice his health already faltering. Physicians whisper of gout, the rich man's disease. They recommend moderation, yet the regent refuses. Caricaturists outside seize upon his decline. In the streets of London, prints are sold showing him grotesquely fat, his belly hanging, his face puffed. He is mocked as the Prince of Wales. The insult cuts, but not enough to change his ways. By 1820, when George ascends the throne formally, his body is a burden. At the coronation, you watch attendants adjust his robes. The garments, heavy with ermine, nearly crush him. Witnesses describe him sweating profusely, pausing to catch breath, leaning on aids to complete the ceremony. To the nation, the crown rests on a king. To you, standing only steps away, it rests on a body already collapsing. In the years that follow, George's physical state dominates his reign. He withdraws from public duties, preferring seclusion. At Windsor, he remains behind thick curtains, attended by physicians who cannot heal him. You walk the halls and smell the air, stale with sickness, perfumed in vain with incense. His legs are swollen, his ankles disappearing into vast calves engorged with fluid. Dropsy has taken hold. His joints are inflamed, gout making each step agony. Servants carry him in chairs, his bulk too great to support. Medical notes describe his organs failing. His bladder enlarges, filled with stones that cause agony when he attempts to pass water. His liver, saturated with years of alcohol, begins to fail. His arteries harden, his heart strains under immense pressure. The king's body is a battlefield, every system collapsing in slow, visible ruin. You see the evidence each time he shifts in bed, wheezing breath, beads of sweat, groans muffled in silk pillows. In private, he continues his indulgence. Accounts mention his breakfasts: anchovies, eggs, pigeons, steak, pastries, washed down with wine. At night, he still drinks heavily. Servants remark on the endless bottles emptied, the meals delivered to his chamber. His appetite is both comfort and curse, fueling the very diseases that consume him. Outside his walls, politics continue without him. Parliament advances reforms. Industrialization reshapes Britain. But the king grows more irrelevant. Newspapers report on his excess, his absence, his decline. Where once the monarchy embodied vigor, now it symbolizes decay. You see the dissonance. A kingdom at the height of empire, ruled by a man who cannot walk. By 1824, the decline is unmistakable. Visitors note his appearance: bloated face, eyes heavy-lidded, complexion flushed. His waist is enormous, corsets no longer capable of restraining him. He no longer disguises his state. When seen, he is slumped in chairs, his robes arranged to hide his immobility. The image of majesty has dissolved into pity. Doctors attempt interventions. They bleed him, purge him, prescribe reduced diet. None succeed. His constitution, weakened by decades of indulgence, resists all remedies. Reports describe enlargement of the heart and diseased bladder. His dropsy worsens. Ulcers appear on his legs, oozing, wrapped in stained bandages. Attendants must change linens frequently, for the fluids seep and the stench clings. You witness the discomfort in every gesture, the wince, the groan, the sigh of exhaustion. Even in his final year, George clings to pomp. He insists on receiving visitors in silks, jewels glittering on swollen fingers. He forces himself upright in chairs, though his legs dangle useless. He jokes bitterly, masking pain with wit, but behind the performance, he is near death. June 1830 arrives. The king remains confined to Windsor. His physicians note gradual sinking. On the morning of the 26th, you are in his chamber. The windows are shut, the air heavy. George lies propped with pillows, unable to lie flat, his lungs too congested. His attendants dab his brow, bring water to his lips. He breathes in ragged gasps. Dropsy has filled his body with fluid. His heart strains. His physicians can do nothing. In the evening, his struggles end. Witnesses record that he died peacefully, yet as you watch, you know peace was not the truth. His final hours were marked by suffocation, by the slow drowning of his own body. His chest rose and fell with effort until, at last, it rose no more. Silence filled the chamber. The obese king who could not stand alone was gone. The autopsy confirms what you saw. His heart was enlarged, his arteries diseased, his bladder was enormous, filled with stones, his liver bore scars of cirrhosis, his abdomen distended, filled with fluid. Each organ testified to years of overindulgence, years of slow decay. Even in death, his weight made burial a task. Attendants struggled to move the coffin. His body, in life and after, remained a burden. As you stand in the dim light of Windsor, you feel the lesson carved in flesh. Power does not halt decay. Kings die as grotesquely as beggars. Rich foods, fine wines, silks and jewels, all could not save George IV from the collapse within. You remain at Windsor, but now the moment after death unfolds before you. The body of George IV lies still upon the bed, curtains drawn, the air heavy with sickness. Attendants move cautiously, for the king's corpse is vast, swollen with dropsy, discolored from within. They whisper among themselves, knowing the difficulty that lies ahead, preparing the remains of a monarch who had been too heavy to stand even in life. The corpse is stripped of its royal garments. Beneath the silks, the truth is unavoidable. The flesh is bloated, the abdomen distended, the legs thick and misshapen. Sores mark the skin, bandages seep through with fluid. The physicians present record what they see, noting the signs of long-standing disease. To them, it is not majesty but pathology, organs destroyed by decades of excess. You are close enough to smell it, the sweet, cloying odor of decomposition already beginning, mingling with the lingering stench of sweat and sickness that had filled the room in his final days. The autopsy begins. The notes are clinical, but the reality is grotesque. His heart is found to be enlarged, its walls thickened, arteries hardened. His liver shows cirrhosis, scarred and mottled, evidence of years of alcohol consumption. His bladder is described as enormous, filled with stones that had tortured him for years. Dropsical fluid is drained from his abdomen in great quantity, his organs compressed beneath the weight of his own failing body. Each finding confirms what you witnessed, a man undone by his appetites. Beyond the physicians, servants struggle with the physical body. It is heavy, difficult to move, difficult to dress. They attempt to clothe him in royal finery for viewing, but the garments strain at seams, and adjustments are made in haste. The coffin, when prepared, must be reinforced to bear the weight. Even in death, his mass is a burden on those who serve him. Outside Windsor, the news spreads quickly. The king is dead. Bells toll, newspapers print notices, and crowds gather. Yet the reaction is muted, tinged with relief. For years, George had been mocked and resented, his reign marked by self-indulgence and withdrawal from duty. He left behind debts, scandals, and a legacy of ridicule. Where once kings inspired mourning, now the public greets his death with a shrug. Even with laughter, pamphleteers recall the Prince of Wales caricatures. the image of a monarch bloated by excess. In the public mind, he had become less a ruler than a grotesque spectacle. But within the court, rituals must proceed. You follow as the coffin is carried, attendants straining under the load. The procession moves slowly, the weight of the king a constant obstacle. At every turn, the grandeur of monarchy collides with the physical reality of a body overwhelmed by disease. The music is solemn, the banners lowered, yet beneath the surface there is strain, effort, and exhaustion. The symbolism of majesty is undermined by the practicalities of decay. Burial preparations continue. In St. George's Chapel at Windsor, the vault awaits. You stand in the shadows as the coffin is lowered, heavy ropes creaking under its mass. The air is cool here, the stone walls echoing with chants. The body disappears into darkness, sealed away from the world it once consumed. In that silence, the king who once dressed in gold and jewels is reduced to dust and memory. But memory is not kind. Writers of the time record him as gluttonous, selfish, extravagant. Even his allies admit his faults. The Duke of Wellington remarked that George lived for self alone. Others recall the indignities of his final years, the stench, the immobility, the endless indulgence. You, having witnessed it, know the truth more vividly than they. This was not simply a king who grew fat. This was a body that collapsed in on itself, piece by piece, until no organ remained untouched. The tragedy is not only personal, it is symbolic. Britain in the early 19th century was a nation of reform, industry, and change. Its monarch, however, embodied the opposite: inertia, indulgence, decay. The contrast was stark, and it left a mark on the monarchy itself. His successors would be forced to reckon with that legacy, presenting themselves as models of duty and restraint to restore faith. But the shadow of George IV's decline lingered. You recall the room where it ended, the drawn curtains, the gasps for breath, the silence after. You recall the swollen legs, the distended abdomen, the ulcers, the fluids, the smell. These are not images that paintings will capture. Portraits show a king in robes of state, his chest broad, his face commanding. But you, standing in that chamber, know that beneath the paint was always the same truth: a man destroyed by appetite. And so you are left with the lesson that outlived him. Power cannot halt the body's collapse. Gold cannot purchase health. Excess brings not splendor, but ruin. George IV, the obese king who could not stand alone, carried that truth in his flesh until the very end. You walk through the long gallery of Windsor Castle, and the story of George IV's life stretches backward once more. To understand the grotesque end, you must trace the indulgent path that led there, through his habits, his vices, and the unrelenting strain placed on his body by decades of excess. From youth, George cultivated a reputation as a man of taste and extravagance. He adored fine clothes, jewels, and architecture. He built Carlton House into a palace of excess and later transformed Brighton into a fantasy landscape of domes and minarets. Yet his body could not sustain the life he demanded. Even in his 30s, accounts note his fondness for heavy drinking and feasting. His figure broadened, his cheeks puffed, and whispers of gout followed him through the corridors of power. You stand at his dinner table. Before him are dishes that dwarf the feasts of lesser men: joints of beef, whole pheasants, towers of sweets glittering with sugar. His appetite is astonishing. Guests remark on the sheer volume of food consumed in a single sitting. He eats with gusto, drinks glass after glass, and by the meal's end, his face is flushed, his breathing labored. Physicians observe quietly, but they know their words of caution will be ignored. It is not only the food and drink. George indulges in stimulants and sedatives alike. Reports describe laudanum, a tincture of opium, taken for pain. He grows dependent on medications to soothe the consequences of his excess. The combination of rich diet, alcohol, And drugs creates a cycle that his body cannot escape. Each year, his weight increases. Each year, his organs strain further. Caricaturists seize upon his form. In London print shops, you see engravings of the Prince of Wales. His stomach exaggerated, his face bulbous, his figure ridiculous. The public laughs, but in truth, they are not far from reality. By the 1820s, George's girth is so great that he must be laced into corsets to contain it. Eyewitnesses describe corsets strong enough to cut into his flesh, leaving marks. But even these cannot disguise his bulk. He is carried by servants, his body too weak to support itself. As king, his health becomes a national concern. Ministers fear his incapacity, though few speak openly. You, however, see the details recorded in physicians' journals. Dropsy fills his body with fluid. His legs swell until the skin stretches tight, glistening, then ruptures into ulcers that seep foul-smelling discharge. His bladder, enlarged with stones, causes agonizing pain. His liver shows signs of cirrhosis, scars from years of alcohol. His heart grows larger, struggling to pump blood through diseased arteries. Each condition compounds the other, until every breath, every movement is labor. Servants describe the atmosphere of his chambers. Curtains drawn to block the sun. Air thick with the smell of sickness and sweat. Bandages must be changed often. Bedding replaced. Sometimes, the king refuses to rise at all, remaining slumped among pillows, drifting in and out of restless sleep. At other times, he insists on donning royal attire, jewels sparkling on swollen fingers, silks straining at seams. He is determined to maintain appearances, even as his body betrays him. By the late 1820s, he is almost never seen in public. When he does appear, it is brief, and always with aid. Witnesses note that he cannot stand unaided. He leans heavily on attendants, shuffles a few steps, and collapses into chairs. His voice, once commanding, is weaker now, his sentences broken by breathlessness. Still, he tries to project authority. But you, standing close, see the truth. A monarch collapsing under his own weight. His decline is relentless. Physicians attempt treatments, but medicine of the time has little to offer. They bleed him, purge him, recommend abstinence. Nothing helps. The swelling worsens. The pain deepens. The stench of disease intensifies. Diaries of those close to him describe the misery of his condition, the gasps, the groans, the sight of a king unable to lift himself. As the end approaches in 1830, George is confined almost entirely to his chamber. He is propped on pillows, unable to lie flat for fear of suffocation. Servants wipe his brow, bring water to his lips, adjust bandages. His final weeks are described as a slow drowning. Dropsical fluid fills his chest and abdomen. His heart strains to keep him alive. Each breath rattles, each gasp weaker than the last. You stand in the heavy air of Windsor Castle and feel the inevitability pressing in. When death finally comes, it is almost a release. His body, swollen, ulcerated, broken, ceases to struggle. The physicians declare it heart failure, brought on by years of disease. The autopsy, clinical and brutal, confirms what you have seen. Enlarged heart, diseased arteries, cirrhotic liver, enormous bladder filled with stones, dropsical fluid in great measure. Each organ tells the same story. Indulgence beyond limit, collapse without reprieve. And yet, in the silence after, you feel no triumph, no lesson softened for comfort. What remains is the image of a body consumed by its own appetite. George IV, once regent, once king, lies reduced to pathology, his reign marked by grandeur, his legacy shadowed by ruin. This is what you carry as witness: the sight, the sound, the stench of a monarch undone by flesh. You stand now not only within the private chambers of Windsor, but also in the echo of public memory. George IV's death has passed. Yet his figure lingers, bloated, mocked, pitied. To the people, his reign becomes a symbol of decline. To you, as witness, it remains a record carved into flesh and stone. A reminder of how appetite can consume even a king. The newspapers of 1830 record the details with restrained formality. They announce his passing, describe the funeral, and note the accession of William IV. But between the lines, public opinion speaks more clearly. There is little grief. Many had long regarded George as wasteful, extravagant, indifferent to his subjects. Caricatures continued to circulate, reminding all of the Prince of Wales, the grotesque image that outlasted dignity. Even in death, satire shadows him. Yet the rituals of monarchy proceed. You watch as the coffin is carried through the halls of Windsor. The pallbearers strain, their faces tight with effort, the weight of the body still formidable. The procession moves into St. George's Chapel, where stone vaults have held centuries of kings. Here, amid chants and solemn music, George IV is lowered into darkness. Attendants wipe their brows, relieved the burden has been placed down at last. But the burial is not the end. The legacy of his body, his habits, his ruin, continues to shape perception of the crown. His subjects had seen a monarch consumed by excess, a ruler who rarely appeared in public because his body betrayed him. They remembered the sight of him propped in chairs, unable to walk, sweating beneath robes, clinging to dignity with corsets and jewels. They remembered the smell of sickness that clung to him, the whispers of ulcers, dropsy, and stones. These images lodged in memory as firmly as any law or speech. You consider the autopsy report again. The words are cold, clinical. Heart enlarged, bladder enormous, liver cirrhotic, abdomen distended. They read as medical fact. Yet you recall the reality behind them, the wheeze of his breath, the seep of his wounds, the weight that crushed his frame. Science confirms what you already knew, that his body had become a catalogue of disease. The courtiers who had once dined at his feasts spoke differently after his death. Some admitted relief, others recalled the indignities of serving a monarch who could not move alone. His physicians wrote of their frustrations, their inability to curb his indulgence, their helplessness as each system failed. For them, his decline was not simply tragic, it was inevitable. In the broader sweep of history, George IV is remembered less for his governance than for his decay. He left no great reforms, no military triumphs, no enduring victories. Instead, he left a cautionary tale. He became the embodiment of what happens when power shields a man from consequence. When wealth provides every indulgence but no discipline. You, standing across the centuries, see how the crown could not save him from collapse. Inside the chapel, the stone closes over him. Dust gathers on the floor. Candles burn low, and the world moves on. Industrial Britain advances. Railways stretch across the land. Factories rise. Reform bills pass. The memory of George fades into caricature, into whispered anecdotes of gluttony, into medical notes preserved in archives. But you have seen the reality behind those notes. You have smelled the air of his chamber, heard the rattle of his lungs, watched the effort of attendants lifting his bulk. History often smooths the edges of monarchy, polishing kings into symbols. But here, the edges remain sharp. George IV's body does not allow forgetting. His decline was too visible, his stench too strong, his corpse too heavy to carry without struggle. You cannot polish rot into gold. So you walk once more through Windsor, corridors silent, and recall the sight. A monarch who became prisoner of his own flesh. A king who could not stand, who could not walk, who died drowning in his own body. And though the crown passed on, though the empire endured, his story remains fixed in the shadow of decay. You are still within Windsor Castle, but the chamber is empty now. The king has been buried, The attendants dismissed, the curtains drawn back to let in air. Yet the image of George IV remains with you, vivid and unrelenting. His swollen legs, his distended abdomen, his wheezing lungs. His body was not only the vessel of a monarch, it was the stage on which his decline played out. Visible to all who came near. This final part of the story is not about his death alone, but about what it meant. You move through the years of his reign again, not to repeat but to understand. You recall his coronation in 1821, so extravagant that it nearly bankrupted him. He insisted on robes heavy with jewels, on spectacles that displayed grandeur. But beneath the robes, he was already a man who could not stand unaided. Guests marveled at the brilliance of the ceremony. Yet those closest knew he was sweating, gasping, leaning on attendants. The symbol of majesty was already hollow. You stand at Brighton, in the royal pavilion he adored. Its rooms echo with laughter, music, and the clatter of dishes. Here he indulged endlessly, eating courses upon courses, drinking without restraint. Guests later spoke of his charisma, but also of his excess. They described him staggering, unable to walk steadily, collapsing into chairs after meals. The pavilion, glittering with domes and dragons, was not only his pleasure palace, it was the backdrop of his bodily ruin. Medical accounts confirm what you observed. By the mid-1820s, George was suffering from severe obesity, advanced gout, probable congestive heart failure, chronic bladder disease, and cirrhosis. Dropsy swelled his legs until ulcers opened and wept. His body was propped upright to prevent suffocation. Each condition made the others worse, until he was trapped in a cycle of suffering. The descriptions are consistent, clinical, undeniable. This was no private discomfort. It was a collapse visible to all who attended him. You see the physicians again. They bleed him, hoping to relieve pressure. They purge him, hoping to ease congestion. They apply poultices to his swollen legs, hoping to draw out fluid. None of it works. The medicine of the early 19th century had no cure for the diseases of indulgence. They could only watch as the king declined, noting symptoms in journals that survive to this day. Their words are precise, but you saw the reality behind them: the sweat, the gasps, the smell. Outside the palace, the public mocked relentlessly. Caricatures in London shops depicted him as bloated, grotesque, a man drowning in his own flesh. He was ridiculed as the Prince of Wales, a title that clung even after his coronation. This ridicule mattered, for it reshaped how monarchy was seen. A king was supposed to embody strength, dignity, divine order. George embodied appetite, excess, collapse. In this way, his body became not only a personal ruin but a political symbol. And yet, amid the ruin, there was irony. George loved beauty. He commissioned art, music, architecture. He refined taste, patronized artists, and left behind buildings that still stand. He sought elegance, but his body betrayed him. The man who created beauty lived in a form that had become grotesque. You, as witness, see the contradiction clearly. Silk stretched over ulcers, jewels glittering on swollen fingers. Music played in halls filled with the odor of sickness. His final months brought no redemption. At Windsor, he withdrew completely. He rarely appeared in public. And when he did, attendants held him upright. He was, in truth, no longer capable of ruling. Ministers carried forward government business, while the king sat propped in pillows, gasping for air. You watch as he tries to speak, his words broken, his chest heaving. The crown weighed heavily, not on his head, but on a body collapsing under its own indulgence. On June 26, 1830, his life ended. You were there, in silence, as his chest rose and fell for the last time. You saw his attendants struggle with the corpse, swollen and heavy. You heard the physicians describe his organs, diseased beyond repair. You smelled the chamber, thick with decay. His death was not sudden, not graceful. It was the slow drowning of a man whose body could no longer sustain him. Now, in the quiet after, you carry the memory of what it means. Power could not protect George IV from collapse. Wealth could not purchase him a body free from disease. Status could not shield him from ridicule. He remains a lesson written in flesh and decay. That indulgence without limit ends not in splendor but in ruin. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you have seen may never leave you again. You leave the chamber at Windsor. Yet the image lingers. The heavy curtains, the drawn faces of attendants, the swollen body of George IV, these do not fade easily. Time has moved on. The crown passed to William IV, and the empire continued its march into industry and reform. But what remains with you is not empire, not ceremony, not triumph. It is the sight of a king consumed by appetite, a body that became its own prison. You step into St. George's Chapel, where the vaults hold centuries of monarchs. The stone is cool, the light dim, the silence heavy. Somewhere beneath your feet lies the coffin of George IV, reinforced to hold his weight. Lowered with effort, it rests now in the darkness. The marble above bears only his name, his dates, the symbols of monarchy. But those words cannot tell you what you have seen. They cannot speak of the ulcers, the stench, the distended abdomen, the endless struggle to breathe. They cannot tell of the attendants straining to carry him, of the physicians helpless to stop the decline. History smooths such edges. Textbooks describe his reign in polite phrases, his patronage of the arts, his role in the regency, his architectural legacy. Few linger on the ruin of his body, on the ridicule that shadowed his final years. But you, as witness, cannot forget. You know that beneath the gilded robes, flesh swelled and burst. Beneath the silks, there were sores. Beneath the crown, there was wheezing, gasping, drowning. You walk again through Brighton's royal pavilion. The painted ceilings, the glittering chandeliers, the domes rising against the sky, all remain. They speak of George IV's love of beauty, his desire to surround himself with splendor. And yet, within those same halls, he feasted beyond measure, drank until his liver failed, collapsed into chairs too weak to hold him upright. The pavilion is both monument and tomb, both beauty and ruin, a mirror of the man himself. What, then, remains of him? Not the strength of a ruler, not the dignity of a sovereign, but a caution. His reign teaches that indulgence unchecked leads to collapse. That power cannot preserve the body from the laws of flesh. Rich or poor, king or subject, all are bound by the same truth. You linger one last time in the quiet of Windsor. Dust gathers on stone, footsteps fade, and centuries pass. The empire that crowned him grows, changes, declines. His name appears in histories, his image in caricatures, his buildings in tourist guides. But the body you witnessed, bloated, ulcerated, broken, lies forgotten by most. Only the stone remembers, only the vault holds him. And so you carry the lesson forward. That wealth, power, splendor, all dissolve in time. That kings can die as grotesquely as beggars. That a body neglected, a body abused by appetite, will one day collapse, no matter how many jewels adorn it. You leave Windsor knowing this. George IV, the obese king who could not stand alone, is gone. His gold has tarnished, his flesh has rotted, his breath has ceased. All that endures is the silence of stone and the warning etched into memory. Time swallows all. Flesh decays. Crowns pass. Voices fade. What you have witnessed is not merely the end of a king, but the reminder that nothing, neither majesty nor indulgence, escapes the hand of mortality.